Thank you very much. It is such a joy to be here today to see all of you. The concept of communicative leadership and how we use the different aspects and the skills of communication are so important in very, very many ways. Definitely in this idea of negotiation and mediation, but more specifically in my specific topic, which is communicative leadership. So got to share my slides that I have. So let me do that.
Let me remind you that we will have the English language session and then the short translation, like summarize and translations at the end.
Definitely. So I will make sure that I stay on topic. Okay. All right. So the first thing is in terms of conflict resolution, as you can see from the title that I have here on this first slide, conflict resolution can be looked at as a communication concept that leaders can use in everyday business, as well as in specific negotiation mediation types of meetings. So let's dive right in and let's think about conflict resolution and leaders. So before I get into the conflict resolution piece, I would first like to draw your thinking to the idea of what are great leaders? Who are great leaders? If I were to ask you, could you think of a great leader that either does exist or has exist? People like Mahatma Gandhi, Winston Churchill, Martin Luther King Jr., Constantine, Suleiman the Magnificent, or even Abraham Lincoln. There are just many others that could be argued as the greatest leaders throughout the history of the world. But what I propose to you is what really defines them as a great leader. Was it their military prowess? Perhaps their exemplary communication skills, their ability to influence others, or that underlying goal to unite peoples. Yes, when we read about these great leaders that I have here and others that you might think about, we can find the lasting effects of their leadership reign throughout the publications in text and online. We can see sultanships and empires that lasted for centuries. The recognition of peoples and nations still exists in today's world. So what does that really mean about a great leader and their ability to communicate? I believe that really what lies beneath their greatness was their ability to resolve conflicts. So what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to focus on what I call the 3 keys to resolving conflict. So let me name them, and then I will go into more depth and explain them. So the first one is what I like to call the goodness of conflict. Oh, kind of contradictory words, some people might think. Goodness, conflict, those 2 kinds of things don't normally go together, but I will talk about how they do. Second is the power of conflict. And yes, many of us might feel this power, but we don't really understand what it means in terms of that conflict, except in the bad sense. There is a good sense to the power of conflict. And then the third idea that I'll be speaking about is the goal of conflict. That may sound like something very simple, but believe it or not, that goal of the conflict is often overlooked and confused, such that many times our conflicts don't reach the kind of resolution that we really desire. So first, we have to understand and believe that conflict is actually a good thing. Before we can accept this, though, I realize that we must understand that conflict is, write this down, the perceived incompatible goals of the parties involved. If we can think about conflict in really this very basic idea that it is a perceived incompatibility of goals between the parties involved, we can begin to understand, well, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a angry, volatile type of situation, but it's merely moving down the road of how do we get from incompatible goals to truly compatible ones. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I live in an apartment and I have a roommate that lives with me. I'm actually still in college, so I have to go to my studies and I have homework to do. I have projects to do. So here we are on a Wednesday night. It's been a grueling week and I want to relax and enjoy some time with my friends. And I want to invite them over here to the apartment so that we could eat, maybe watch some shows, play some games, or just enjoy each other's company. My roommate, however, who is also my study buddy as we go through our courses together, wants to finish our group report that's due next week, as well as begin to plan the meal for the dinner party that we had already agreed to have with our friends tomorrow evening. So if we listen to the two goals that I just defined, we find that either party perceives the other party's goals to be incompatible with their own. They believe that they can't accomplish their own goal without the cooperation and inclusion of the other person. Well, I suppose I could kick you out of the apartment when I wanted to have my party and get together, but that wouldn't bode well. It's that evening or even maybe the next day, you might be very, very upset at me. So I began to realize that, yes, there is this incompatibility of our goals, and I need you in order for my goal to be successful. And you need me for your goal to be successful. So as we begin to sit and think about that incompatibility, where does our brain go, right? Do we immediately think about, oh, this is going to be bad. I'm going to have to argue. We may even get upset at each other. I may not have my party tonight, nor might we finish the group report. Nobody's going to accomplish their goal. But we have to ask ourselves, does it have to be bad? Does it have to be that kind of conflict? Do we have to feel stress, feel bad about the difference in our goals? Do we have to give up our goals in order to solve the conflict? I suggest to you that no, you don't have to feel any of these things. But what we do have to do is understand each other's goals before we can seek to have them understand ours. So how do we accomplish that? How do we move from this bad feeling of conflict that's going to happen to, well, this can be a good thing? Well, we can accomplish it through asking questions, paraphrasing what we think we heard them say. Yes, and you all know it. It's called active listening. We have to engage. If they believe that we truly are trying to understand their position, their goals, their needs, their desires, they're going to be more willing to listen to our side. They begin to trust our intentions of seeking collaboration, which, if you've read about all the conflict styles, that is a win-win situation. Way too often in conflict resolution, we don't think about a win-win situation. We typically are thinking about a win-lose. Even if we may not say it, it is typically, I need to get my way. I need to have my goal accomplished. So what we have to do then in this very beginning, in this goodness of conflict, is we have to make sure that we change our frame of mind. And we think about conflict not as a bad thing, not as a stressful thing, but as simply incompatible goals. And we need to figure out a way to make those goals more compatible. Secondly, the power of conflict. So typically in a conflict, we find that there is a perception by both parties that there is an imbalance of power. So when it comes to thinking about this idea of power of conflict, our focus, our goal has to be that we want to not just have a perception. We don't want them just to feel that there's a balance. We want them to truly believe, and there must actually be a balance of power in that conflict situation. And I'm sure you've read much of the research, which has taught us that in any conflict situation, it is almost always the case that one party perceives that the other party has more power than they do, making them feel this anxiety, making them fear the conflict that they are going to embark on. Unless, of course, you decide on the conflict style of avoidance and you don't embark on it at all. But if you don't do that, then that means you never move down the road of conflict resolution. So if we each walk into a conflict situation believing that the other person has more power than we do, we need to understand why. Where is that thought coming from? Why do I believe that they have more power than me? Well, it could be things like they're in a higher position than us. They're our boss. They're a team lead, right? These powers of position can actually, yes, make us feel very anxious. It could be things like physical strength. Wow, if I really make them upset, they just may hit me. That kind of power can also lead us down the road of anxiety. Or perhaps maybe it's the power of knowledge. Wow, we're in this team together. We are disagreeing. We have these incompatible goals about something, but they know so much more about the subject than we do. So we feel inferior. Again, we begin to feel that feeling of anxiety. Or maybe it's something as simple as popularity. We're in a group, everybody knows them more than you do, more than you. They've seen their work, they talk about them, you've seen it, you get into a circle and everybody just kind of gravitates towards them, they're just drawn to them. And so they're more popular. Again, when we get into that conflict situation with them, we begin to feel inadequate and anxious, stressful. So if two individuals enter a conflict situation with the belief that the balance of powers is not in their favor, they come to the conflict ready to fight, not collaborate. They feel that they're going to have to come to that conflict arguing constantly rather than trying to collaborate and to understand. So one of the concepts that I want to bring to you is a concept by the authors Hawker and Wilmot. It's a textbook that I do use quite often in my conflict resolution classes, the courses that I actually teach. And he refers to what he calls power currencies. So it's an easy way for us to think about the different powers of imbalance that we may feel in a conflict situation. So those power currencies, here's an acronym, something easy to remember, is RICE, R-I-C-E, RICE. The 4 different types of power currencies that we need to understand and quickly ascertain when we are involved in a conflict situation. The R stands for resource control. This is the type of power that comes with a formal position, as I spoke earlier, right? So as you think about that conflict situation that you're going to be entering, is there resource control? Do you believe that the other person has more power over you because of this resource control? They actually have the formal position, they have the title, they have the ability to wield and make decisions over you. The I is interpersonal linkages. This kind of power comes with your role as that central point of an organization. You're seen as that bridge or that liaison between parties. When I was still working in industry, there was a term that I was given. I was called the fire putter outer. If there was a conflict situation and people couldn't resolve it, call Blossom. She will help. She has answers. She will get us to our conflict resolution. I was seen as that bridge or that liaison between the different business groups and entities and departments when they had these conflict situations. So that is the interpersonal linkage type of power. The C in RICE is the communication skills power. Now, I'm sure you've all read in leadership how communication is its key. How a leader conveys ideas, behaviors that they want the organization to have, interactions that they want people to have throughout their organization. The communication skills that they exemplify make all the difference in the world. I mean, think about it. Are you going to trust somebody who when you listen to them, you wonder, are they telling the truth? Are they really thinking about this for my best interest? Or are they just coming in here because they're the leader and they have resource control and they're just going to try to change everything and make us all behave like little puppets, the way that they want us to behave? So those communication skills have to be very, very good. And it could be communication skills and just conversational. How do they actually just interact with me? Do they make me feel like an important person? Or do they make me feel like I'm definitely a subordinate to them because they're the leader? Are they the persuasive type? And it's a good persuasive. Do they make me feel like, yes, I'm valued and why? And so therefore I should come along with them. I should be what they want me to be. Or perhaps the communication skill is listening. They're not the leader that just talks at you all the time. But the power that they have is that they really listen to you and make you feel valued. Or perhaps it is something in terms of just a group leadership. So I'm sure many of you have been on teams. Have you floated to the top in that team as the leader of that group? Did you naturally become the leader because everybody else felt that power that you had of communication, that they knew that in order to complete whatever task the team had to complete, they knew that you would get them there? That's your communication skills. The E in RICE is expertise. So this is the other one that I also mentioned earlier. Expertise comes with special knowledge, skills, or talents that you bring that are useful to the task at hand. I don't know if you've heard of the term that many use. Are you a expert in one thing, or are you knowledgeable in many things? And so when you come to a particular conflict situation, how are you seen? Are you seen as that expert, and that your knowledge, your expertise, your skills, your talent that you bring to that particular conflict situation, it is overwhelmingly an expert, that they feel inferior to you? You now have that power over them, whether you realize it or not. So being able to understand these different types of power is your beginning to marching down your road of conflict resolution. So when we talk about power in conflict, many, and I'm sure you've read it in the literature, say that it is the capacity to influence others, right? Isn't that what you're trying to do in this conflict situation? You're trying to convince them that your way is the right way. This is how we should do it. And if we do, everything will be great. Well, they're thinking the same thing, right? So I believe that it is about, and note the word I'm using, it's about the potential to influence others to act or behave in a certain way. Why is it the potential? Well, it is very important for you to really understand that, yes, it is about that capacity to influence others. That is what power is, but it is a potential. And I'm sure that you've experienced it. Power is that potential to influence because we are expecting the parties, both ourselves and them, to change, but it is dependent upon our perceptions that we have about the situation and about the power that we each bring to the conflict. We must know and understand that we do control certain valuable resources, thus the conflict, thus the power imbalance that we both feel. But what we must understand that this dependency, the perceptions that we have about the control that we have over these valuable resources, that there is actually an interdependency. I can't succeed without you, and you can't succeed without me. So if we begin to make ourselves feel that, you know what, you're just as important as I am, that power that they have over us begins to melt away. But it can't completely melt away until you learn to actually make a balance. So let's go back to a few examples. Let's say, for instance, your boss requires you to work late without compensation, of course. After all, we're salaried employees. We don't have hours that we have to clock into, right? So they ask us, oh, this important thing has to be done. I need you to work late tonight. Well, we understand immediately and perceive that they control our ability to not only have the job, but for any future raises or compensation that we may receive. So what do? We work late. Another example, team meeting, right? So you get on a team. You might perceive most of those people as peers, right? There usually isn't a boss over you, even though a leader may surface. They're not a boss, so it's a different feeling and a different situation. But in this team meeting, there is an individual that kind of surfaces to the top. They get up to talk about why all of you on this team should do things their way. They show you chart after chart, information, data, and they talk so intelligently about all of this knowledge and information that they've gathered. And they tell you why you need to do it their way. I mean, just look at all of this information. Well, you perceive in that particular situation that they must understand this task we have to do way more than I do. They may have even said things like, I've done something like this before. So, right? So now what they've shown to us is, right, this power of expertise, this knowledge. And how do we begin to feel? Well, we not only don't even ask any questions about all of that information that they presented, we just agree. Yep, that sounds good. Yep, let's try that. I'm on board with you. Because we have this fear of if we ask a question or if we question their information, we might look like the village idiot, right? What, she doesn't understand all of this? So we don't engage. We actually avoid, and we let that power of knowledge that that person has over us take control over the situation. So what does that mean then? Oh, well, I guess I'm just resolved to that? No. We have to again remember, as mentioned with Rice, that there are many different reasons why power is perceived as imbalanced in a conflict situation. The key is first knowing that we must strive to balance the power. Yes, we must. So whether we are in a high or a low power position, we must strive to create the balance. How can we do that? Well, there are many different ways that we can do it. We can do, if we were in the high power situation, we might actually make statements addressing the obvious imbalances. Things such as, well, I know I'm the boss, but in this particular situation, you consider me as a peer. Speak to me as a peer. I'm not your boss, speak freely. Or you can ask questions to understand what power influence are they actually perceiving? Because many times our intentions, even if we are the boss or we have more expertise, our intentions weren't to lord it over them, to tell them, I know more than you do, or I'm your boss, so we have to do it this way. That isn't our intention. But because the perception that they have is there, we need to make sure that we understand whether or not they believe that that power does exist, that that imbalance is there. So you can simply ask questions. Sometimes we need to remember that the balance can only be achieved by adding a third party. That's important to remember because many times, and I was this way early in my career, after all, I was the fire putter outer. I felt that I had to find the way to balance that power. I had to find the way to get us both to the end. But sometimes, depending on what type of power was actually being felt by the other individual, there was nothing I could say, no question that I could ask that they would trust me to really do it. They didn't believe me when I said, I know I'm your boss, but you know what? Let's just talk about this as peers, right? Don't think of me as your boss. Well, it's kind of hard to not think of me as your boss, especially when you're now in my office sitting on the other side of my desk. It's kind of hard to do that. So sometimes bringing in a third party can help balance that power. So what happens when that third party comes in? One of the things that you, as that higher powered person, has to do is make sure that that third party intervenes on the behalf of the lower powered party. It's not that they're just in there to be the active listener and to repeat what you said and to try to get that lower powered individual to believe what you said. No, they're actually there to intervene on the lower powered person's behalf and to speak to that higher powered person. So now that lower powered individual believes, oh, now it's 2 against 1. I have a little more power balance. So third parties are very helpful in trying to balance that power. Another way that individuals with high power can create balance is to, and this is hard, exercise restraint. Many times, we with higher power do actually realize and understand the power that we bring to a conflict situation. And many times we actually use that power to try to get our win. Well, if you are really working on collaboration and trying to balance the power, you are going then to exercise restraint in utilizing some of the power currencies that you have. So you have to consciously think about how you're saying things, communication skills. How am I saying it? What am I saying? For example, they can choose not to shame or humiliate others for any reason. Don't ever speak poorly about anything having to do with the other person. Don't talk about prior mistakes they made. Don't talk about errors that they may have created. Those are all ways of shaming or humiliating them. Yes, people with higher power, and I'm sure you've experienced it, utilize that to let you know that they have the higher power. When we are in that position, when we as leaders have that kind of higher power, sometimes we need to hold back on that. We need to restrain from ever using it. Another example might be, as the leader, you actually do control the money in the system. You can actually stop anybody from doing anything. They can't move ahead. They can't get the supplies they need. They can't go get the training that they need. You actually control the money. Well, how do I abstain that? I mean, I can't just start throwing money around, right? Well, what you can do is you can abstain from making any kind of threats that are based on money. Don't say, well, if you make that mistake again, you're just not going to get the resources. You're not going to get the extra time. You're going to have to do it in the time schedule, right? You use that money in order to make them feel less power. Okay, so restraint. Well, what if I'm the person with the lower power? How I haven't made my way all the way up the ladder yet. So I don't even have that position of power. So I come to it with less power, or I'm the newer employee. So I don't have all of the knowledge of the department. I don't even know yet about all of the experiences that have occurred. You do. So I have lower power. Well, how do I then work on balancing that power in a conflict situation that you and I are now in? Well, here's the little trick, and it's really easy to do. You focus your communication, your interactions in that conflict situation on the parties' dependencies. Remember when I started out that I said in any conflict situation, there is the conflict because there is the perception that we are interdependent. So I know that I need you, and you wouldn't even be in this conflict situation with me, somebody in a lower power position, if you didn't believe that, yes, there was also an interdependency. You may have heard leaders define this as, well, I know that, I have all the success because of all of you employees. I wouldn't have the success if it weren't for all of you. It's their way of saying, yes, I realize that there's an interdependency here. So if you are in a lower power position, focus and communicate. So you have to actively engage with these ideas about the interdependency. What does that mean? Well, that means you definitely can't have the avoidance conflict style. You have to be willing to say, to put out there what that interdependency is. What is it that you bring to this conflict situation? But also, you must also mention what are their interdependencies. Why is it that they need you in this conflict situation? Okay, if you focus on those things, it brings back both of you thinking about solving this particular conflict. Lower power balance then is also achieved by what I call calm persistence. Yeah, notice the word calm. When power is unequal, substantive change rarely occurs through intense, angry confrontation, right? I'm sure you've been in at least one conflict situation where they just kept pushing your buttons, getting you more angry, making it feel more intense, making it feel confrontational. Hey, you know what? That's the reason why we believe that conflict is bad. It's not good, because the conflicts that we've been in, the conflicts we've experienced, all make us feel this intensity, this anger, this confrontational type of thing. So, needless to say, power inequality will not change if that is experienced or continues to be experienced in the conflict situation. So you, as the lower powered person, must remain calm, but be persistent. Again, you cannot be an avoider. When intensity is high, people will react rather than observe and think. And that's what needs to happen in a conflict situation. Both individuals need to observe the other party, and they need to think about what is their next response, not react. So the key for a lower powered individual is to stay actively engaged. You cannot avoid. You cannot oblige. You cannot demand. You must go towards that fourth conflict style, which is collaboration. Failure to do so will only keep you in that lower powered position. Again, you must remember both parties must seek to balance the power. The goal of power balance is to ensure that both parties perceive that interdependency and valuable resources that are needed to resolve the conflict and don't use it at the expense of the other party. You have to collaboratively achieve a win-win resolution. Finally, you have to understand that what the goal of the conflict is. What you might be asking yourself right now, wait, isn't that what the cause of the conflict was? That perception of incompatible goals? Well, I propose to you that what we talked about at the beginning, that incompatible goals, that is the reason for the conflict, not the goal of the conflict. So let me explain. Let's go back to that roommate situation, right? Where I wanted to invite my friends over, relax, have a party. You, however, wanted to have a study session, complete our project that was due next week, and then actually prepare the meal for the dinner party the next evening. Okay. So yes, I just repeated them, you can see that the goals are incompatible, right? Because you can't have a party going on and work on the group project at the same time. That just doesn't work, right? So conflict then is inevitable. So as you begin to engage and probably argue why you need this much needed break, why you need it tonight, not tomorrow night, but tonight, you're seeking to change the other person's position by asking them to put aside their goal and participate in yours, right? And that's what both parties are really trying to do. I'm trying to convince you to forget about your party, and you're trying to convince me to forget about studying. So the goal of the conflict, if we think that way, is a win-lose situation. I get my way, but if I get my way, you can't have yours. So it's a win-lose, and we're both in that mindset. We're making our individual goals the conflict resolution goal, and that's not where we should be. Instead, we need to agree on what the goal of the conflict should actually be, a win-win situation. So what does win-win look like? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the 4 styles of conflict, right? They're in a quadrant. We need to always work towards that upper right quadrant. We need to work towards collaboration. It may not start out that way, but that's where we have to work towards. What does that mean? Well, it means that collaboration requires that all parties have an open-mindedness about what our individual goals could look like with both parties participating. What could my goal look like if we were both relaxing? What could your goal look like if we were both doing some study? This means then that everyone has to be open to morphing our goals into something different than what we first imagined. This is what true collaboration is. Whatever that goal is that we came to the party with, we have to be willing to make it different. We can do this by asking questions. Things like, why did you feel the need to relax and party with friends tonight? I really need to understand. Why do I feel the need to get the project done tonight? Introspective. I'm asking myself the question, why did I bring in the dinner party for tomorrow night? I mean, that's tomorrow. That's not tonight. The situation is about tonight. The conflict is about tonight. Asking yourself, what are the interdependencies we have in the conflict? What are the valuable resources the parties bring to the conflict? Understanding these types of things are what helps us define what that goal of the conflict is. And as we define what the goal of the conflict is, the resolution becomes more real. The possibility that conflict can result in a win-win scenario is clearer, and the conflict efforts become collaborative. So, achieving conflict resolutions are, whoops, too many, are win-win scenarios. What we need to do is, as you can see on the graph, is, and here's the little test. Do you know what goes into each of the quadrants? If this over here is an avoiding, do you remember what this one is up here? It's obliging. We are more concerned about others and their wants and needs than we are about our own. So we would be over here in the obliging style. Down here, do you remember what this one is? It's demanding. We are more concerned about our goals than we are about theirs. Now, remember, it's fluid, so you can be anywhere in the quadrant, but notice my arrows. You always want to be working towards the top right. Everybody here remember the top right? Collaboration. This is where we always need to be working towards in every conflict situation.
Dr. Blossom, we are running out time.
Okay,
very much. So if we can skip to
yes, one more slide and I'm there.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So achieving conflict resolutions that are win-win scenarios requires the parties to understand that conflict is a good thing, that everyone strives to achieve their own planned goals, that power imbalance is always a first perception and must be addressed. And finally, we have to decide that if we want a win-win resolution, we must agree on the conflict goal. It is simple, what I just outlined, sounds so simple, but it's not an easy task to accomplish. And so I leave you with this last thought. If we first seek to understand rather than be understood, we will get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a very interesting presentation, especially the keys for resolving the especially the power in conflict. It is indeed very important and very interesting. Thank you so much for your very engaging presentation. And I should underline and mention that you as a speaker you are very powerful and very charismatic. So you have this power. Thank you so much. I think we will have a short translations, very short, because we are running out from time. And maybe if there is some questions or if there are some comments, you can use the chat for this. And thank you once more.
Okay, so maybe I will have now a short translation for our Ukrainian participants, okay? Okay. Отже, щойно ви мали змогу прослухати лекцію доктор Блосом Танде, професора і співзасновниці голови ради правління підрозділу Education Connection Solutions, професора Отавського університету в Сполучених Штатах Америки. І доктор розповідала і доповідала на тему комунікативного лідерства. Взагалі, під час доповіді було зосереджено увагу на вирішенні конфліктів як чинника комунікацій і як комунікативного аспекту в цілому. Пані Блосом було наведено приклади великих лідерів, таких як Черчилль, Магатма Ганді, Абрахам Лінкольн і інші. І саме те, що зробило їх великими лідерами, це здатність вирішувати конфлікти. Основними ключами для вирішення конфлікту, які виділила пані Блосом, це три основних складові, які суперечать одні одній. Проте, зрозумівши саму концепцію, вони допомагають вирішити конфлікт в цілому. Перший – це доброчесність конфлікту. Це означає те, що в будь-якому конфлікту потрібно досягнути формули win-win, коли дві сторони перемогли, а не коли якась одна сторона перемагає, а інша програє. Другим ключем для вирішення конфлікту є сила конфлікту, тому що потрібно зберігати завжди баланс сил і між сторонами. І третє – це саме ціль конфлікту, тобто нам потрібно завжди розуміти інтереси іншої сторони. І пані Блосом дала таку пораду, що перед тим, як розуміти інтереси іншої сторони, потрібно до того, як вони зрозуміли ваші інтереси. Також були наведені дуже багато різноманітних робіт, над якими працює нашим учасникам.